Week 8 is officially underway, and today I got you guys covered with my top 30 wide receivers in the tier list format that I do on every single Friday going into this week's slate. We're talking about the wide receiver 1s, wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 3s, and my 5 favorite deep flex plays to help you guys get situated for your fantasy football lineups. You guys are trying to get your playoff spots. I'm here to help. So if you guys enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below. Comment your biggest start-sit decisions. I'll try to get to as many as possible. And of course, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We are on the road to 40,000 subscribers. Appreciate you guys for that continued support. But with that being said, let's get right into it. All right, before I get into the official top 30, I got to go through the will they play tier, and the general rule of thumb of guys in this tier is that I'd like to see at least one full practice between today or tomorrow prior to Sunday's game slate, and if not, I would lean towards a slightly lower ranked counterpart. So the main two guys we have to talk about today that would be in our top 30 would be Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins, he would be my wide receiver 1, assuming he plays in this game. Apparently, there was a report he did miss practice yesterday. There was a report that Tyreek Hill just, wanted some attention, this and that. Basically sounds like he's going to be ready to go. So if you have Tyreek Hill, fire him up with wide receiver 1 level confidence. I have him as my wide receiver 1 overall. Jalen Waddle, wide receiver of the Miami Dolphins, a little bit more unclear about his status, but it is stated here by Sport MD Analysis, Deepak on Twitter, that apparently he's expected to play in Week 8. Low stats impact. He should be ready to go. There's mild re-aggravation risk for the next 3 to 4 weeks, but he should be ready to go in this game. Fire up Jalen Waddle with top 15 level confidence if he does suit up in this game. But I think we can move on because there's no bye week teams this week. Everybody is on the table. Everybody is on this week's slate. Last week we had a couple bye weeks. There are no bye weeks for Week 8. So if you have all of your fantasy football players, they will be accessible for your lineups. But let's go on and talk about my wide receivers 1 to 6. Starting off with wide receiver 1 on the slate, Stephon Diggs. We were able to see him on Thursday Night Football. Produced 9 catches for 70 receiving yards on 12 targets for about 16 PPR points. If you have Stephon Diggs, a little bit on the lower end of the expectations, but at the end of the day, you can tell me 16 PPR points is, a little bit disappointing. At the same time, if that's the floor you're getting for Stephon Diggs, given the target involvement, given this Buffalo offense, he is a clear-cut top 3 wide receiver any single given week moving forward. Jamar Chase, wide receiver of the Cincinnati Bengals, comes in as my wide receiver 2 on the week. He goes up on the road to play the San Francisco 49ers. And it's a tough matchup on surface level given how well the San Francisco defense has played this year, but the area that they're actually weak is outside of the numbers, which oddly enough is the biggest strength of the Cincinnati Bengals offense. Chase does a lot of his damage out there. We know the boatload of targets he can earn on a week-to-week basis. He's commanding over 30% of the Bengals targets on the year. Target utilization, like I mentioned, on top of the offensive volume we can expect, the Bengals are top 5 in pass rate and number 1 in neutral pass rate in the entire NFL. I think that gives Chase a huge target floor in this game, while still being one of the premier deep threats in the entirety of the NFL. The only downside for Chase is that the Bengals are only implied for 20 points, but I think given the week off, having the bye week, letting Burrow's calf rest is going to say a lot of good things for this Bengals offense moving forward, aka Jamar Chase landing as wide receiver 2. A.J. Brown, wide receiver of the Philadelphia Eagles, goes on the road to play the Washington Commanders and comes in as my wide receiver 4 on the week. He's been on a tear this season. He's compiled over 20 PPR points per game, and he has 5 straight games of 125 plus receiving yards. Since week 3, he's dominated the target hierarchy there in Philadelphia. Devontae Smith, obviously a very good player in his own right, but A.J. Brown has shown out to be the alpha target commander, 34% target share in that stretch, and he now plays the Commanders defense, who rank as the 5th easiest matchup on the matchup chart, and is the same defense he bullied for over 40 PPR points back in week 4. If you have A.J. Brown, high-end wide receiver 1 standing for me this week. Keenan Allen, wide receiver of the LA Chargers, comes up next as my wide receiver 5. Goes to play the Chicago Bears at home on Sunday Night Football this week. He's been a target monster all season. He's posted over 10 targets per game on the year, and he's commanding a near 30% target share for the Chargers. The Bears are more of a run funnel defense, but they're also a poor pass defense overall. They're just a bad defense in general, to be quite honest. I do expect the Chargers coming into this game, needing a win after losing these past 2 games against the Cowboys and the Chiefs, get it done on offense, and I think this is a smash spot for Keenan Allen to continue the league-winning display he has for the whole season. But now we move on to the second batch of my top 12 wide receivers, the wide receiver 7 to 12 area, and the 3 guys I want to mention, starting off with CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys and Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams, coming as my wide receivers 7 and 10 respectively this week. And prior to the bye week, we saw CeeDee Lamb bounce back in a huge way against the LA Chargers after a disappointing week against the 49ers, and now he's set to take on the other LA team. He still averaged roughly 5.7 receptions and 80 receiving yards per game on the year. If you equated that across a 17-game sample, that would equate to about 96 receptions and nearly a 1,350-yard pace. The only problem right now is that the touchdowns have been down for CeeDee Lamb in general. However, the Cowboys are implied for 26 points in this game. They're coming off a bye. They're at home, and I expect CeeDee Lamb to be heavily involved out of the gate for a Rams defense that has given up big games to George Pickens and A.J. Brown in 2 of the last 3 weeks. And on the Rams side, when it comes to Puka Nacua, we know just how good Cooper Kupp is, but what Puka's been able to do despite sharing the pie with him has been remarkable. They have near identical marks across the board in terms of usage, and both possess high-end wide receiver 1 utility right now. And the fact that they've commanded 71% of the targets when Kupp has come back speaks volumes to just how good Puka is as a talent, as a target commander, being able to be the concentration of this passing attack. And it'll be tough for both him and Kupp to absolutely smash this week against a tough Cowboys defense on the road, where the Rams are only implied for 20 points. But I got to give them their flowers. The utility is too high. This offense is still working because Matthew Stafford is playing good football. And you know, when Matthew Stafford drops back, 70+% of the time, it's going to either Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp. Therefore, he ranks as a top 10 guy for me. And then finally, Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers, goes to play the Cincinnati Bengals at home this week, comes in as my wide receiver 9, and he's the alpha target commander for this team. Deebo Samuel is out for this game. I expect him to continue commanding targets at the rate he has been. Obviously, having Brock Purdy potentially out for this game with his concussion symptoms would sting, but I trust the structure of this offense, and I trust Shanahan to keep the O flowing even if Purdy were to miss. And despite the expected absence of Brock Purdy, San Fran's still implied for 23.5 points in this game, and the Bengals have allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Therefore, if you have Brandon Ayuk, start him up with wide receiver 1 level confidence. And then finally, my wide receiver 12 on the week would have been Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who played on Thursday Night Football. 3 receptions, 39 yards, and a touchdown on his 6 targets, 12.9 PPR points. Relatively down day for Mike Evans as a whole. If he didn't score that last-second touchdown, it would have been a complete bust, but at least he got into the end zone for you, which is always a possibility on any given week when it comes to Mike Evans, the big 6'5" monster himself. But you knew to start these guys. Now we go on to the 13 to 30 range of my ranking, starting off with the high-end wide receiver 2s tier, led by my wide receiver 13 this week, Adam Thielen of the Carolina Panthers, going to play the Houston Texans at home. And Adam Thielen makes his first appearance inside the top 15 of my rankings this week, and validly so given the high-end usage we've seen from him this year, 28% of the targets, and is the first read for the Carolina Panthers in high-leverage situations. Yes, my offense is the main concern here. They have a low implied total this week, but Thielen has proven he commands enough volume for it not to matter. Texans present a relatively tough matchup against wide receivers, but Thielen has been matchup-proof this year. And on the flip side of the matchup, Nico Collins has been an absolute target monster all year for the Houston Texans, and now gets the matchup against the Panthers with the Texans implied for over 23 points in this game. Collins has been Stroud's go-to all year, and he's shown an elite weekly ceiling when the passing offense is firing on all cylinders, which I expect it to be against this overmatched Panthers defense this week. Next up, Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles cracks the number 14 spot in my rankings, going on the road to play the Washington Commanders, like I mentioned, with his teammate A.J. Brown. And Smith has been volatile recently, and A.J. Brown has proven, like I mentioned with him, that he is the clear-cut alpha of this team. However, Washington can't cover a nosebleed right now, and Devontae Smith has a squeaky wheel spot in what's been the forgotten man in Philadelphia thus far. I'm willing to lower Devontae Smith if he keeps underperforming, but like I mentioned, I think this is the get-right spot for him this week. Christian Kirk, wide receiver of the Jacksonville Jaguars, goes on the road to play the Pittsburgh Steelers this week and comes in as my wide receiver 15. We finally made a change to these rankings. Until further notice, Christian Kirk is the wide receiver 1 for me on this Jacksonville Jaguars team. I still think Calvin Ridley is talented enough to earn back that number 1 role, but if I didn't adjust the pecking order for how I rank these guys, I would simply be in take lock, because across the board, I mean, Christian Kirk has just been superior to Calvin Ridley this year, outranking him in targets per route run, target share, catchable target percentage, 3rd and 4th down targets, PA targets, PPR points per game, and his PPR rank. I mean, it's just flat out. Christian Kirk is playing better football right now. Calvin Ridley obviously has had a couple of spike weeks, but from a consistency standpoint, from a week-to-week standpoint, Christian Kirk is the wide receiver you want for the Jaguars for the time being. He scored over double-digit PPR points in his last 6 games. Number 17 is DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears going on the road to play the LA Chargers this week. And DJ Moore commanded 9 targets and had a relatively productive day in PPR, despite not hitting that big play this past week with Tyson Bagent at quarterback. Bagent played well against the Raiders, and while it's hard to fully trust a rookie UDFA, Moore has the easiest matchup on the entire matchup chart, going up against this overmatched Chargers secondary. Definitely a risky play, but I think DJ Moore has shown himself to be quarterback-proof in the past with his time in Carolina, and I don't want to miss out on this matchup for him this week, Sunday Night Football against that Chargers team. If you have DJ Moore, like I kind of mentioned here, wide receiver 2 level confidence in my lineup. My wide receiver 18 this week is Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings going on the road to play the Green Bay Packers. And Jordan Addison absolutely went off this past week, scored over 30 PPR points, over 120 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns in this game. This was his true breakout game in the NFL. Addison has averaged 15 PPR points per game as a rookie, and he's commanded 24 targets in his last 3 games. He's the wide receiver 15 in PPR on sub 80% of the Vikings routes. And once the Vikings play him in a full-time role, I think the ceiling for Jordan Addison is uncapped. Fire him up in your lineups with top 20 level confidence. But moving on to the low-end wide receiver 2s, we start off with Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders going on the road to play the Detroit Lions this week on Monday Night Football. And 19 even feels low for Jacoby Myers, but I'm baking in some positive regression here when it comes to Davante Adams. Davante Adams has been off these last few games. I expect a get-right spot for him, hence why I have Davante Adams in my top 10, and Jacoby Myers is slightly downgraded from the top 15 status he probably deserves based on these last few weeks. But that's no slight on Jacoby Myers, man. He's still commanding elite volume, and he's kept it a very concentrated target share for this Raiders team at this point. It's Adams, it's Jacoby Myers. That is the Raiders' offensive output. Myers, in my opinion, is an every week wide receiver 2, and like I kind of mentioned, based on the matchup, he can be high or low end on that spectrum. The game environment in this game against Detroit isn't very great, but the volume alone keeps him up inside my top 20. Wide receiver 20 on the dot for me is going to be Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens going on the road to play the Arizona Cardinals this week. He's commanded a 28% target share as a rookie, which is absolutely bonkers. And while we want the usage to expand down the field, his involvement gives him an extremely high floor on a weekly basis. Advantageous matchup this week against Arizona. The Ravens are implied for over 26 points in this game. And with Zay Flowers himself, he's averaged about 13 PPR points per game. Once he gets more downfield usage and he expands his route tree, I think Zay Flowers has a top 15 ceiling. But for the time being, given his usage right around the line of scrimmage, he's going to be more of a low-end wide receiver 2 for me. Next up for me is Garrett Wilson, wide receiver of the New York Jets, coming as my wide receiver 21, playing against his cross-state rivals with the New York Giants this week. The game environment is tricky for Wilson. The Jets are implied for less than 17 points in this game, and the Giants have represented more of a run funnel defense rather than the pass. But at the same time, Garrett Wilson is commanding a 32% seasonal target share and over 50% of the Jets' end zone targets. I wish he had a better quarterback situation to deal with. Zach Wilson has been as volatile as they come, but with the offensive limitation, he is a low-end wide receiver 2. But now we move on to my wide receiver 22 and my start of the week with Drake London, wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons, going to play the Tennessee Titans on the road this week. He's commanded 24+% of the Falcons' targets every single week since week 4. And while he's only the wide receiver 29 in the season, he's averaged 14.9 PPR points per game since week 4. Tennessee is the definition of a pass funnel defense. They represent the second easiest matchup on the matchup chart against the pass, while being absolutely stingy against the run. The Falcons aren't going to be able to run the ball at will in this game. I expect them to lean on this passing attack, headlined by Drake London, therefore making him my start of the week as my wide receiver 22. Wide receiver 23 is George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers, going to play the Jacksonville Jaguars at home this week. And Pickens has experienced a breakout second-year campaign thus far. He's commanded 28% of the Steelers' targets on the year and even had a 35% target share with Deontay Johnson in the lineup in week 7. And game environment isn't great for the Steelers this week. They're implied for less than 20 points. And the Jaguars have presented a tough matchup against the pass against opposing wide receivers this year. But I think George Pickens has just played well enough for the matchup implications not to matter. It's clear to me that the Steelers took the training wheels off of George Pickens. They've allowed him to develop into a full route tree wide receiver, and he's paid them back with the sharp development curve we've seen this year. I think George Pickens is going to be a stud. I was a little bit lower on him coming into the season, but I've completely warmed up to the fact that George Pickens just might be a wide receiver 2 moving forward. Wide receiver 24 for me this week is Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts, going to play the New Orleans Saints at home this week. Michael Pittman has a 27% seasonal target share, and he scored double-digit PPR points in all but one game this year. Saints present a tough matchup, but the Colts offense functioned well enough with A-Rich out of the lineup this past week. And as long as Gardner Minshew doesn't turn the ball over, I expect him to be able to score points regardless of who's at quarterback again. But now we move on to the wide receiver threes for me this week, starting off with my wide receiver 25, T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals, going on the road to play the San Francisco 49ers. And the Niners proved these last 2 weeks that they aren't this invincible juggernaut that people want to talk about after that blowout win against the Cowboys. And like I mentioned with Jamar Chase, the Bengals have the highest neutral pass rate in the entire NFL, and the Niners concede points to outside wide receivers. T. Higgins has been a bust in fantasy this year. I won't deny it. He hasn't been the fantasy asset we've expected coming into the season. But this offense projects too well, and T. Higgins is too good of a player for me to doubt in this spot. I think the get-right spot is coming soon and may come this week with the Cincinnati Bengals coming off their bye week and Joe Burrow being as healthy as ever. Receiver 26 would have been Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He played on Thursday Night Football against the Buffalo Bills, ended up producing 5 receptions for 54 yards and a touchdown on his 7 targets, 16.4 PPR points. So if you started him with top 30 level confidence, you were probably very pleased with the output he had in this game. Wide receivers 27 and 29 for me respectively are DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks going up at home to play the Cleveland Browns. And on the flip side of the matchup, Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns going to play the Seattle Seahawks on the road. After missing last week's game against the Cardinals, DK returns to play the #1 ranked D across the board with this Cleveland Browns defense. I think Metcalf is still a talented enough player to win the matchups on his own right, but I can't stress enough just how much of a nightmare matchup this Browns team presents. #1 on the matchup chart, #1 in terms of defensive DVOA across the board. This is one of the most legendary defenses we have seen in the NFL in quite some time, and I think we should treat them appropriately. He's still DK Metcalf, but the ceiling is severely capped going up against this matchup with the Cleveland Browns. And on the flip side with Amari Cooper, we just need PJ Walker to be able to hit the broadside of a barn for him to be able to pay off. He commanded 8 targets this past week, and he's commanded about 8 targets per game as the Browns' clear alpha target wide receiver 1. But the quarterback play simply hasn't been there. We need more consistency for the quarterback position, and I do think that this week, getting him his targets, we just have to pray that the quarterback play isn't as volatile as it's been on a week-to-week basis. 28 is Calvin Ridley of the Jacksonville Jaguars going on the road to play the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I got to be a man of my word here. Until Calvin Ridley goes out there and balls out, he'll be a wide receiver 3 in my rankings. He's been bad, and if you roster him, you probably don't want to start him, but I'm trusting the process here on a wide receiver running 90% of the routes for Trevor Lawrence this year. Steelers present a top 5 matchup on the matchup chart, and if there was ever a spot to get right for Calvin Ridley, it would be this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then finally, my wide receiver 30 on the week is going to be Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders going to play the Philadelphia Eagles at home. He's had back-to-back solid performances, getting him back into the top 30 consideration, and now gets the Eagles past D he carved up just in week 4. The Eagles are a clear pass funnel defense, and I expect the Commanders to lean on their passing attack, knowing they won't be able to run the ball at this Eagles front. McLaurin is starting to show a consistent target floor, 20 targets in his last 2 games, 35 in his last 4. I think he's in store for a strong performance against this Eagles defense. But moving off my top 30, we go on to my 5 favorite deep flex league plays. Starting off with Romeo Doubs, wide receiver of the Green Bay Packers. Let's keep it pretty simple here. Targeting involvement has increased with Watson present, but he still plays 80+% of the snaps for this team. The Vikings are an easy matchup on the matchup chart and are the worst team at guarding #2 wide receivers. I expect the Packers and Vikings to be a high-scoring game, and Doubs has shown his knack for scoring touchdowns this year. Kendrick Bourne of the New England Patriots goes on the road to play the Miami Dolphins. 34 targets in his 4 games with over 60% of the snaps. He has been the alpha wide receiver 1 for the past this year once he's gotten that opportunity, and I expect him to continue being a fringe top 30 level play for me if he keeps this consistent play up. Third wide receiver for me this week would be Jalen Hyatt of the New York Giants going to play the New York Jets at home. And he just played 70+% of the Giants snaps in each of his last 2 games. 9 targets, 96 receiving yards in those 2 games. I just want to bet on a young player earning a full-time role for this team. On a team that's needing a #1 wide receiver, which the Giants absolutely are, I'm firing up Jalen Hyatt with desperation level expectations. Fourth wide receiver for me is Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs going on the road to play the Denver Broncos. 5 out of his 7 games, he scored double-digit PPR points, and he just posted his season high in terms of route participation this past week. Top 40 level outlook for me with a legit wide receiver 2 ceiling if we see his snaps increase moving forward. He might not even qualify for the deeper league flex play, given that he's probably even a flex league play in shallower leagues, but I love the talent here for Rashee Rice, and I think the ceiling is absolutely massive. And then finally, number 5 is going to be Tank Dell of the Houston Texans, going on the road to play the Carolina Panthers. He practiced in full and is expected back for this game, and he got off to a hot start. This year with 2 20-plus point performances. I expect him to get back on track this week. But either way, if you guys enjoy, make sure you leave a like I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And of course, if you want access to all of these rankings and more on any single given week, if you want access to our weekly rankings manifesto and our rest of season rankings manifesto, there is one of 2 ways to access it right now. The first way being if you guys go over to Underdog Fantasy and you guys use promo code FSE at checkout, not only will you get 100% match back on your deposit up to $100, you will also get full access to both of these manifestos, as well as the other way to access them is by going over to flockfantasy.com, using promo code FSC for 30% off either the Flocker or the Mother Flocker package. If you do that, you will also get access to our manifestos. But with that being said, peace out. Good luck in your matchups. And like I mentioned, drop your biggest start sit decisions down below. I will get to as many as possible. Take care.